Something explosive just happened at the very first race of the 2026 Formula One season. The Australian Grand Prix was supposed to introduce a revolutionary new era. New engines. New hybrid technology. New FIA rules designed to shape the future of the sport. But instead, Melbourne may have revealed the first major problem of this new generation of Formula One cars. Because immediately after the race, one of the biggest names in the sport made his frustration clear. Max Verstappen. The reigning champion finished only 6th, more than 50 seconds behind the dominant Mercedes cars. And his reaction sent shockwaves through the paddock. Verstappen admitted something fans almost never hear from him. Right now, Red Bull is not the fastest team in Formula One. At the same time, the race itself exposed something even more controversial. The new 2026 rules have completely changed how drivers fight on track. Overtakes that last only seconds. Cars suddenly gaining huge speed advantages because of battery deployment. Drivers forced to manage complex energy systems instead of simply racing flat out. Meanwhile, Mercedes delivered a perfect 1-2 finish with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, dominating the first race of the new era. Some analysts now believe the Mercedes power unit could even have around 30 extra horsepower compared to rival manufacturers. If that is true, it could completely reshape the balance of power in Formula One. And suddenly, after just one race, drivers are frustrated. Teams are asking questions. And the FIA is facing intense pressure over the very rules that were supposed to define the future of the sport. So what exactly happened in Melbourne? Why is Verstappen so angry about the new system? And did the Australian Grand Prix just expose the first major flaw in Formula One's new era? The moment the Australian Grand Prix ended, the mood inside the paddock changed almost instantly. Because the result in Melbourne did not just reveal the winner of the first race. It revealed something much bigger. A completely new balance of power in Formula One. Mercedes did not simply win the race. They dominated the entire weekend. From the very first practice session, the W17 looked incredibly strong. George Russell topped the timing sheets in the final practice session with a 1 minute 19.053 lap, more than 0.6 faster than the closest Ferrari. That kind of gap immediately raised eyebrows across the paddock. Because at the start of a brand new regulation era, the field is usually extremely tight. Teams are still learning the new cars. Still understanding the hybrid systems. Still trying to unlock performance. But Mercedes looked like a team that had already solved the puzzle. Then came qualifying. And the gap became even clearer. Russell delivered pole position with a 1 minute 18.518 lap. Almost 0.3 faster than his teammate Kimi Antonelli. A complete front row lockout for Mercedes. At that moment, several teams realized something uncomfortable. The W17 was not just quick. It looked completely balanced. Strong acceleration. Efficient energy deployment. And a chassis that seemed perfectly suited to the new hybrid era. During the race itself, the situation became even more obvious. The start was chaotic. Both Mercedes drivers had poor launches when the lights went out. Charles Leclerc managed to jump into the lead at the first corner thanks to a quicker reaction from the Ferrari power unit. For several laps, the two teams fought intensely. Russell attacking. Leclerc defending. Overtakes happening back and forth on the straights. But the battle revealed something very interesting about the new rules. Every time Russell activated the new overtake mode, the Mercedes released a burst of electrical energy. That allowed him to pass the Ferrari. But the system came with a price. Once the energy was used, Russell temporarily became vulnerable. Which allowed Leclerc to counterattack when his own battery deployment was stronger. It was a perfect example of how the new 2026 regulations have transformed overtaking. Battles are no longer decided only by driver skill. They are also decided by energy timing. But the real turning point of the race came when the first virtual safety car appeared. A Red Bull stopped on track with a mechanical failure. And Mercedes reacted instantly. Both Russell and Antonelli dived into the pit lane at the same time. A perfectly executed double pit stop. Ferrari decided to stay out on track. And that decision changed the entire race. Because the Mercedes cars returned to the circuit with fresh tires while losing almost no time under the neutralized conditions. From that moment on, Russell controlled the race from the front. Managing the tires. Managing the energy deployment. And keeping the Ferraris behind him without ever looking under serious pressure. Antonelli's race told another dramatic story. Only one day earlier, he had crashed heavily during the final practice session, damaging the rear of the W17. The Mercedes mechanics worked through the night to rebuild the car before qualifying. And somehow, Antonelli still managed to secure second place on the grid. But his race start was poor. He dropped to 7th position in the opening laps. Yet the pace of the Mercedes allowed him to recover quickly, overtaking several cars, fighting back through the field, and eventually securing second place behind Russell. A perfect 1-2 finish for Mercedes. For Mercedes, it was the ideal start to the new era. But for Red Bull and Max Verstappen, the race revealed a much more uncomfortable reality. Because while Mercedes celebrated, Verstappen was left trying to understand how the gap had become so large. And when the reigning champion finished 6th, more than 50 seconds behind the leaders, it became clear that something fundamental had changed in Formula One. But the real explosion inside the paddock happened after the race, when the drivers finally began speaking openly about what they had experienced. Because for many of them, the Australian Grand Prix felt very different from a normal Formula One race. Not just because of the result, but because of how the new regulations are changing the way the cars behave during battles. Max Verstappen was one of the drivers who made that frustration clear. After finishing 6th, he admitted something that immediately caught attention across the paddock. Right now, Red Bull simply does not have the fastest car. And if the team wants to fight for victories in this new era, they will need to find much more performance. For a driver who dominated large parts of the previous era, that admission is extremely significant. Because Verstappen rarely accepts being behind without raising serious concerns about why. But the problem was not only the performance gap to Mercedes. It was also the nature of the racing itself. The 2026 regulations rely heavily on electrical deployment, which means drivers must constantly manage the balance between using battery power and saving it for later in the lap. If one driver deploys energy aggressively, the car can suddenly gain a huge speed advantage on the straight. But once that energy is gone, the situation reverses. The car becomes vulnerable, and another driver can attack. This creates a strange rhythm during battles. Cars overtaking on one straight, then losing the position again only a few seconds later. Not because the driver made a mistake, but because the battery deployment cycle has changed. Several drivers described the experience as extremely complex. Instead of simply pushing the car to the limit, they are constantly thinking about energy management, battery levels, recovery phases, deployment timing, all while racing at 300 kilometers per hour. From the outside, it can look spectacular. But inside the cockpit, it can feel unpredictable, and sometimes frustrating. This is exactly why the FIA now finds itself under pressure. Because the 2026 regulations were designed to define the future of Formula One. Manufacturers like Audi and Ford joined the championship partly because of this hybrid concept. Teams have invested hundreds of millions developing these engines, which means rewriting the rules now would be extremely difficult. But the reaction from drivers shows that the balance between technology and racing may not yet be perfect. And that balance is critical for the identity of the sport. Formula One has always been about the fastest drivers pushing the fastest machines to their absolute limits. If the technology becomes too dominant, drivers risk becoming managers of complex systems instead of pure racers. That is the debate now beginning inside the paddock. Some engineers believe this is simply the natural evolution of motorsport. More technology, more software, more energy strategy, But some drivers believe Formula One must be careful not to lose the essence of racing. The feeling that the driver is the one truly in control. After the drama of the Australian Grand Prix, that debate is only just beginning. Because if the same patterns appear again in the next races, if drivers continue struggling with unpredictable energy battles, then the pressure on the FIA to make adjustments could grow very quickly. And what started as a chaotic opening race in Melbourne may become the first major controversy of the new Formula One era.